Hey, awesome. Welcome back to our third Stop the Hate podcast. And my name is Kauahoa Hermosura. I'm from the island of Kauai. I am native Hawaiian and I currently am studying at Menlo College in California. And I'll pass it over to Camille.
So, aloha everyone, my name is Camille Leihulu Slagle. I am originally from Kailua on the island of Oahu. I am also native Hawaiian, and I am currently a junior at Stanford University, majoring in chemistry and minoring in geological sciences.
Awesome. Siota ofa kainga. My name is Leila Tamale, she, her pronouns. I am a junior as well at Stanford University, majoring in comparative studies and race and ethnicity. Born and raised in San Mateo, California, here in the Bay Area. My genealogies, my father is from the Kingdom of Tonga, but he is Tongan, Samoan, and Fijian, and my mother is French. I'm also a very, very proud product of community college. So my first year at Stanford, even though I'm a junior, so I transferred just last year from the College of San Mateo.
Amazing. Awesome to hear. So I guess we'll just get right into it and start with our first question, which is, what does hate mean to each of you? What does hate mean to you personally? And then what does it mean to you in our communities?
Do you want to kick us off, Camille?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So to me, personally, I feel like hate, I've seen it on both on both a community level and then also on just like a widespread, more general level. As I'm someone who's pretty active on social media in terms of like Native and Pacific Islander activism. So for me, whenever I think of like the word hate, I like think of it as like a term like I would use to describe someone who basically like a lot of hatred, quote unquote, towards Polynesians or Pacific Islanders in general in the media, I believe just stems from like people who like they don't get something out of us. Like they can't, when they figure out that they can't exploit us, our people, our culture, they don't get anything back in return from Pacific Islanders in general. That as you can I think a huge example is just say hula in the media or tourism in general has caused a pretty big spark in this issue and people turning at this hatred towards Hawaiians for quote unquote gatekeeping our own culture, our place, and just this romanticization of our culture and of Hawaii and of Hawaiian Pacific Islanders in the media in general. When people feel that they don't like automatically benefit off of us, I feel like that's when that something turns quickly into hatred, specifically because they feel like they can't reciprocate anything back from us. So I've seen that on like a national, international level, even on social media. But then even for me, like I feel like hatred just stems from like a lack of when something stems from a lack of ignorance or misinformation, I tend to give people like the benefit of the doubt. But when someone still refuses to change their paradigm about something, when they like refuse to be like change how they view something or someone, that's to me when it becomes hatred because they just refuse to change or acknowledge the truth, and then instead they like this absence of fondness or admiration immediately becomes hatred towards a group of specific thing or a group of people.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of what you just stated. Hate is such an interesting word. Like growing up, my mom would all like whenever be like, oh, like I hate that, I hate this person, da da da. Like my mom would be like, we don't use hate, we don't like, because she's very like positive and just it carries a really heavy charge. And so I think like I definitely agree with what Camille was just sharing about how hate really comes with like honestly at the core of it is violence. And so this kind of violence can be either overt or covert, explicit or implicit. I think that even though you generally associate, or one might generally associate hate with like bigotry, something really like vile, kind of like evil in a way, to the point where it's just strongly malicious and wanting to cause harm. But I think that especially in the current climate that we are in, where because of like, you know, neoliberal kind of like ideologies and people like white people like like they hate being called racist more than actually doing things that might have like basically racist effects, you know what I mean? And so I think with that similar kind of thing, we need to kind of expand how we think about hate. Even though it historically does have that kind of like really strongly malicious kind of connotation. I think that for me, in the wake of COVID, in the wake of you know, the most recent resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and all of these things, we're seeing hate come up in, yes, both really explicit ways, like you know, folks being confronted at protests and like throwing things at protesters or getting in verbal altercations or even physical. You know, in I think Charlottesville, when that white supremacist tried to like or did drive into a crowd of protesters. But we also see hate in really undercover ways. And for me, those undercover ways, like what would fall under like microaggressions, you know, hate into the form of absences, where it's like lack of representation in certain decision making kind of spaces, things like that. I think that those are, you know, forms of hate that are honestly in some ways worse because it's harder to, you can't really name, like a lot of people would be like, what, when you name it as hate. And so because these things are harder to kind of call out in a way, because they're softer, they're more insidious and kind of implied, it can be harder to combat. And so yeah, those are some of the different like complexities that I feel around hate.
Yeah, I love what you both said. I mean, those are things we talked about in our last shows as well. But the lack of education, and that is kind of the root of hate, is what we discuss because, you know, people aren't born hating, they learn hate. And then similarly with the microaggressions, that is something that's like one of my favorite topics to discuss actually, because it's something not as talked about, and how different groups face microaggressions, but then Pacific Islanders facing microaggressions even in like just regular conversations that we have with people up here that are like, OMG, I love the movie Moana, like you look like Maui, or things like that. So definitely love all of everything you guys just discussed. And kind of going off of that into my next question for you two are, how do you react when you see hate or discrimination directed towards like yourself?
I'm definitely, I think, not a confrontational person in person. Like, if in person, I like tend to like shy away from things. But I think being away from home and like being at a university where Pacific Islanders are less than 1% of the student population, I've had to like slowly learn to like, you know, grow up and like stand up for myself and for my like people and for just others, like other minorities, other people in general. Like I think that's been one of like the biggest like journeys I've been on throughout my few years up here in the Bay Area and in California and at Stanford and specifically. So it's a lot easier for people behind to like say malicious things like what Leila was talking about, like behind a screen. So when they're hidden, you know, their identities are obscured, they don't have to face you in person. So it's definitely like a lot easier to stand up for people and stand up for yourself on social media and like online in general, because, you know, you don't have to physically like confront the person that you are talking to. But I think in person, that's something I've been always a little better at doing it, standing up for myself on social media, especially just I tend to use TikTok a lot as a platform to talk about a lot of specific Polynesian or Hawaiian issues. So for me, it's really easy to just like click and, you know, obviously just make a video and reply back to a comment. And oftentimes I will say I do it in the heat of the moment too, which can sometimes fuel the problem and make it worse. But it does help sometimes, I think, to just know that there are people like out there who will like stand up for you or for yourself or for other people, and especially the PI community. Like, we're such a small community, we have each other's backs, which I always like feel like so grateful, like to know that I have people standing behind me, and that I know I can stand behind other people and help them with their issues as well. So social media online has been something that's always been a little easier for me than doing in person. But for sure, I think in person, whenever I like see it's been a learning process, but I always like Stanford has very much so taught me to like never be afraid anymore to, stand up, speak up for what you believe in, especially at a school of 7,000 undergrads. There's always going to be something going on. There's always going to be someone who disagrees with you or is going to say something that it could be racially motivated or charged, or like microaggressions, like what you were talking about. So it's definitely been a learning process for me, but I will like 100% now, whenever I have the possibility to go about it and confront the issue in a hopefully non violent way, if as a means of resolving the issue, that is 100% what I've been like striving to do, and that is one of my goals for myself and for while in college and in the future, to continue to stand up for people who maybe do not have that voice, and or to do that for themselves, or means and opportunities to do that for themselves, or at least just be there and as a means of support as well, if anything. So that's definitely how I try to go about responding to hate whenever I see anything happening.
Wow, that's very, very admirable. The resistance, like holding yourself back from physical kind of responses, even though you may justly, feel called to that. And then I also want to commend you on like your growth and kind of like pushing yourself to like stand up for yourself, even though you may feel like you want to go towards like the non-confrontational side. Yeah, I think that's awareness and growth is awesome, of course. Yeah, well, so for me, like, being here at Stanford at a PWI, primarily primarily white institution, predominantly white, it's a whole crazy bubble and world all in and of itself that I've never experienced before on this magnitude. However, I have definitely been in a lot of spaces like this my whole life. San Mateo is pretty diverse, but the neighborhood that I was raised in specifically was predominantly white and East Asian, middle class, upper middle class. And so a lot of my early educational experiences were there. And the first elementary school that I went to, again, same demographics reflecting the neighborhood. And I was like the only like brown skinned person there pretty much. And especially when I was younger, at this age, I was living half of the time here in California, half of the time in Tonga, because my dad was incarcerated when I was younger and then deported back to Tonga. So we tried to kind of keep the family together and crossing those borders constantly. And so I was like, even darker and all of that. And so I really stood out, and people really didn't like that I stood out. They didn't like that I was different. And this was something this was like a position shared by my peers, my classmates, and we're like all little kids. But little kids can be really mean. Yeah.
No filter.
Right? Yeah. No filter. And they also, like you were saying, Camille, they reflect the ignorances and the hatred that is held by their parents. And so a lot of the parents were pretty anti-Black and, on that scale of everything that's closer to Blackness, which is what I think Pasifika folks in their eyes would fall under, or how they would racialize me at least. And so I received a lot of hate. I had classmates hating on me or trying to bully me. I even had teachers and like the principal who would constantly like single me out and all things like that. And I remember very distinctly, like my mom was called into the office before at this time, and the principal literally told her, she called me a savage to my mom, and was saying that I was like so unruly, and I looked so like my size and like appearance and my hair and whatever like intimidated the other kids, and just things like that. And so things like those forms of hate at such an early age really stuck with me. And at this time I was still, again, like kind of going back and forth between Tonga and my dad being the 6'5" fob like Tongan man that he is. He always called me like, and I'm getting very like personal.
Yes, yes. Thank you so
But
much.
thank you. But he would always call me like his warrior princess. And he really tried to instill in me, whether this is a good or bad ideology. He would really tell me like, if someone punches you, you punch them back. And I like have tried to grow, as you said, Camille, like kind of move away from that kind of mentality. But that at least was what I was taught when I was that age. And so when I would receive this kind of hate incoming, I was very defiant, and I refused to let them bully me and let them kind of like step on me in those kinds of ways. And so that's part of why there was a lot of conflict too, and lots of principal office visits. But something that really was frustrating was, even though there might be kind of like a conflict that would arise, no one would ever pay attention to the reason why I would be reacting to something. They would only focus on my response, my reaction, and I would be the only one who would get any kind of punishment. And so, yeah, and so initially I might have responded kind of reciprocating the kind of mentality that, or the kind of behavior that they directed towards me. But ultimately, and in growing from that, I didn't want to let the stereotypes that they had labeled onto me to be true. And so the way that I responded to those early kinds of discrimination and hate in this early educational setting was just to excel, honestly, to push myself and prove to them I'm not the dumb, lazy Pacific Islander stereotype that y'all have conjured up in your heads and like put onto me without even knowing me. I'm going to do well in my academics. I'm going to serve my community. I'm going to read all the books and study Mandarin Chinese, like all of these things. And that is what I did. And yeah, I really tried to let that refusal to be boxed in like that push me to do better. And so to kind of respond to the hate in a more graceful way as I got older, and just showing them like, you're wrong, and I'll let you sit with your wrongness and just show you by example.
Wow, thank you both so much, and thank you for such personalization of your where you're coming from and like your background. I mean, I think both Camille and I have also had instances where we've had to face people who looked at us in a different way, like even being blessed to grow up in Hawaii and on Kauai, on such a small island, like with the recent influx of more and more people not from the island moving there. I was trying to find a job actually a couple summers ago, and it was with these two people who just moved there from California. They were white and they were like starting this company. And so I had applied and I went to the interview and everything. And then at the end of the interview, they asked me where I was from. And I was like, oh, like we literally were having an interview in the neighborhood I grew up in, that they had like just moved into a house down the road from where I grew up. And they're like, where are you from? I'm like, oh, I'm from here. And they're like, no, yeah, like we get you live here now, but where are you really from? And I was like I'm native Hawaiian. Like I grew up on Kauai. My family is from Kauai. And they're like, wow, that's so amazing. We've never met a person from this place. And like my jaw dropped, and I finished the interview and left and never talked to them again. And it was just like looking back at it, I should have like said something, but I was a lot younger then, still like Camille said, learning how to respond gracefully, and you know, instead I was just like kind of backed away from it. And it was just that stays with me to this day. Like the way they also change how they look at you after like they find out that information. It's just something that like you don't forget that. And so that's why thank you for your story, because I know, like you said, that was from when you were younger and must still stay with you to this day. And like it's a part of why we are who we are and who we become. That's why we're getting our education and going to school and proving them wrong, essentially. And that's kind of leading me to my next question is, do we think that there is a certain pressure put on Pacific Islanders to excel, especially from our own families? And then the difference of excelling in school academics wise versus being good in sports, because we've seen a recent pickup of Pacific Islanders in all the major league sports. Like I just saw the Giants had posted that they have 2 Tongan players now, and then there's all of the um, all of the Pacific Islanders in the like NFL and everything like that. So, what are your guys' kind of perceptions on? Yes, good for us that we're excelling, but do you think there's kind of unright pressures put on us because of maybe the way we look, because of our size, because of our family, and just what are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, it can be so hard, especially when football. I know football is obviously a huge sport for Polynesians, especially like in Hawaii, but especially like when we have when we're already faced with like this demographic and this like stereotype that we like what Leila was talking about, that that we're lazy, that we like don't belong in places, and especially even in colleges and institutions like this where these places were not made for us in the first place. But it can be hard to like try and fight that stereotype and tell people that like we belong here, when football or sports and all of these things are often the only gateway for Pacific Islanders to be able to afford college in the first place. So it's like this never-ending cycle of like contributing to that stereotype when with that we're we're lazy, that we don't belong here, that we're already underrepresented in so many facets of education, and yet we still have to go into like people still have to go into sports and stay in those areas because they know it's the only way that they'll be able to escape that cycle. So that's for me. I know personally, like I was like, granted, I grew up in a good position of privilege, being able to go to Kamehameha schools in the first place, where I had like this like wealth of opportunities and knowledge and access handed to me specifically because I went to this institution that had all of these resources. So I like acknowledge that I am at Stanford today basically because of all of the opportunities and the resources I had available to me. Like who knows, like that is definitely a huge part of where I am today. But at the same time, like the culture shock of coming from Kamehameha to a place like Stanford, where now I'm less than 1% of the student population. It's been hard. Like especially I in chemistry and the geological sciences, being an Indigenous woman in STEM, when I like look around at all of my peers and I'm like the mailing list, and I am the only like literally the only Native person on those lists, or so it's it's hard when they often also come to you and like people pretend that natives are a monolith and like they often go to you as like the point of like DEI or like diversity, equity, inclusion. They expect you to be able to speak up for everything, or you become the token native or the token Polynesian, the token anything in a lot of your classes. So it gets really hard, I think, sometimes to be able to like just want to be here in general and like try to overcome those stereotypes. And then for me, that like my parents put a lot of pressure on me like trying to go to college, because my mom got her bachelor's degree. My mom and all of her siblings went to the University of Hawaii, but my dad only got his associates. Like and then his dad didn't go to college. So like my parents put a lot of like pressure and focus on education because they knew, like obviously like what Kauahoa was talking about, the influx of people coming into Hawaii. Like if they knew for me, like, and I knew that if I want to be able to come back to my home someday, education is the only way to be able to do that and to be able to go out. It sucks that you have to leave your home in order to come back to it in the future, but that's the way I've been like treating everything. So that's why, like, and then just like going back to like my career goals and everything, like I'm someone in chemistry and geology, I interned with the USGS last summer down at Kilauea when it was erupting, and it was one of the greatest like experiences and moments of my life. But I like immediately noticed how every single scientist was not from Hawaii, and even as an intern, I was the only Hawaiian there. Like, and it was like a little bit of a shock to me, even sometimes how they would like just go about, like, I adore the USGS, but and that's where I want to go one day. I want to be able to come back and be able to show that you can integrate both indigenous and Western research methodologies and show that they can corroborate each other instead of compete with each other. But it was really hard for me to like notice that I was the only Hawaiian or Polynesian there representing my people at a place like Kilauea, at a place like so sacred to Native Hawaiians, and then just like looking at some of the research methods and everything that they were doing, especially, you know, the huge one that everybody knows of, like, you don't take the rocks off, like you don't take away Pele's lava. So like having to like wrestle with that specifically, like certain like cultural and like scientific aspects combating hand in hand at each other, it was really hard for me to have to be able to do that. But it's like one of those things that it's another barrier that you have to be able to overcome in order to show that you can be like at the forefront and be like that representation and help be, you know, like the role model and show other people like us and like other Pacific Islanders that we belong here, we belong in these spaces, even if these spaces were not meant for us in the first place.
Snap. Such a good response. This question is already so rich. And then Camille, there's so many things
to it.
Right? I'm sorry, I probably went a little off tangent, but
no,
it's a heated question.
It's a very heated question. I think every single thing that you shared was extremely valuable to this conversation. And so I'm like, oh my God, where do I even start? I will probably, you know, us Pasifika people, like, we love our talanoas, and we will, like, I was in this webinar earlier today, and me and my mentor, we were both speaking, and our time limit was like 2 minutes. We talked for like 10. Like they had to cut off one of the questions because we were just talking so long. But you know, it's okay. So yeah, to wrap that little preamble up, yeah, I think that this is such a good question because we see our people represented so much in sports, right? And I think that's great. It's a great thing. As Camille alluded, or as Camille highlighted, sports are a very valid and meaningful and great avenue for a lot of our young folks, men and women, you know, boys and girls. But I think I'm not a sports person. I'm not going to make that statement. I was going to say maybe more so boys, but I've definitely seen a lot of women, Pasifika women, killing it in like rugby, basketball. Alyssa Pili, shout out to her. That's a whole other tangent. But yeah, so sports is definitely a great avenue. And it has led to the rise of a lot of our family members. However, this hyperfixation on sports, not necessarily from our community, but like from what the world puts on us, because this is the main kind of sphere that they see us going into, I think is highly problematic and damaging to our people as a whole, because we shouldn't be, you know, pigeonholed into one kind of career or one kind of pathway to success. Growing up, this was again like something that I faced in my entire K through 12 experiences. I had only seen 2 Pacific Islander figures in like working at the schools. The first was a Pacifica man who was the custodian of my middle school. And then the second person was a Pacifica woman who was a guidance counselor in my high school. And both of these jobs are great jobs. I don't mean to like throw shade or disparage them at all. But it really sucks that was the only kind of representation that I saw. And there were so many in San Mateo. There's a pretty large population of Tongans and Samoans, especially, and other kinds of Pacifica folks. And so, for all of us to only see our people represented in that kind of way, it really it limits kind of the realm of what you think is possible. And so that was what I saw from like the educational kind of lens. And then in my home life, I mean, after my father was deported, I was raised by my mom, who is Palangi from France, or white, sorry. And
No.
she is there. I'm not going to go into that. I was going to ask if there's a haole. Haole is the word.
Mhm.
Hello. But yeah, and so I didn't really have too much kind of um, experiences or like being surrounded by my Pacifica side of the family. But of the Pacifica family members that I was around, they were all in Vai or like caretaking, or like that kind of healthcare, and then in construction. And my mom is also in construction, even though she's Balangi. And so again, nothing wrong with these jobs. They are wonderful jobs. They provide for so many of our families. Um, and they're just valid and legitimate and good jobs. But again, they should not be the only kind of things that we are viewing as what's possible for us. And so that's why, when I got to community college, when I went to College of San Mateo and I joined the Mana Learning Community, and I don't know if y'all are familiar with community colleges, but learning communities are basically like identity based student support programs. A lot of them have to do with your racial ethnic backgrounds, like Pacifica, Black, Latinx, etc. Um, and Mana Learning Community, part of what was so transformative for me about being in that space was the fact that it completely shattered all of those stereotypes for me that I had been just bombarded with left and right growing up. And it just like opened up my eyes so much to all these other possibilities for our people. The entire staff and faculty of the Mana Learning Community are Pacifica men and women who are scholars, who have gone all the way to the highest levels of academia that you can go to, who've become PhD holders and all of that. And so the first Pacifica person that I met that is a doctorate degree holder is my mentor, Dr. Finalcina Tovo, and she's also a Tongan woman. And to see someone who shared an identity or said that I hold so dearly to me, that was doing the thing, and like really just being such a shining like example and role model, like you were saying, Camille, for our people who didn't gatekeep, who wanted to encourage and invite in more Pacifica youth into those kinds of spaces and help us succeed in higher education was really amazing. And so yeah, so I think that the hyperfixation again on sports, we need to do our best to put a stop to this. And this is why I really appreciate spaces like these where we have these conversations and we show all of the diverse identities and roles and positions in society that us as Pacifica people are holding, and the different possibilities that our youth can strive to. I think so a lot of the work that I do is within expanding access and equity within higher education for Pacifica communities. And in all of the data points, pretty much, we have the lowest rates of like enrollment, of transferring from community colleges, of graduating, high school and in higher education spaces. And to outsiders looking in, um, a lot of like I've heard the kind of rhetoric about how this signals like our families or our cultures not valuing education, um,
Mhm.
and like how that reflects that kind of low prioritization of education. And while every family is different, I was instilled on both my Palangi and my Pasifika side that education is extremely important. And I know that this is the same for a lot of other Pacific families, as you just testified to, Camille. And so I just, I want to just again like affirm the fact that our people, we value excellence, we value academic excellence and achievements, and we have done so, you know, outside of like Western spheres of academia ever since, you know, our ancient times. Like we have been scholars and scientists and mathematicians like for ever, you know, like we were the world's first navigators and wayfinders of the ocean. Like y'all, if that's not scientists, like what is, honestly? So so yeah, so I just I'm glad that kind of conversations about our place and how we belong in academia are increasing, and we're seeing more folks become PhD holders and entering academia and all of that. Yeah, that's this way.
That thank both of you, outstanding answers. I mean, that was so amazing. I think that like like what you said, I mean, Pacific Islanders were some of the first navigators, the first people to use mix the land and science and all of that and take it to accomplish such amazing things. And like I think that people forget this or don't know this, even like how once upon a time like Hawaiians were the most literate people in what they consider to be the US. Like all of Hawaii was literate. And I think it's just kind of astonishing how like now we have the lowest enrollment numbers, the like lowest amount of going to college, which kind of, I mean, I'm the first person in my family to attend a 4-year college, especially away from Hawaii, getting away from home. And I just wanted to ask both of you, like, how much, you both kind of talked about it already, but do you think, kind of a two-part question, how much do you see, like, maybe your classmates or people, family members, just like the people you know who are Pacific Islander attending higher education, or just maybe doing higher learning, whether that's like skills or something like that, or doing a trade school? And then how do we get more Pacific Islanders to higher education?
I can jump in. I like this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. Yeah, I am also a first generation college student. So I feel you. It is a struggle, but I am also not the first in my family to go on to college. I have a bunch of siblings on my mom's side. My older sister Meno, she all my siblings are like 11 plus years older than me, which has been really great in trying to navigate college, because I kind of have that, like, even though I am first gen college student, I still have the privilege of like having, you know, folks who are close to me, like close community members who can, you know, answer my call about like what boxes, what does this FAFSA thing mean, you know, things like that. Um, and so yeah, so my sister went to Cal Poly, and then my sister on my dad's side went to Berkeley, so a little bit of a family rivalry there. Um, but yeah, and it's actually my sister Meno. She's the reason that I even applied, that I'm here at Stanford. Honestly, Berkeley was my dream school for the longest time. And then, you know, when it was application season, I was just perfectly content with applying to the UCs. They're amazing schools. And my sister Meno, she was just like, you know, why don't you just shoot your shot? You know, like you know, what's that saying, like aim for the moon and shoot for the stars, or something like that. And so I did. I was like, you know what, nothing's gonna happen, but for you, like, I will do this. And this is where I am today. And so I really think, going to your question about like, because I think I already touched on the trade school
Yeah.
part a lot. But going to your question of like how we can change these the severe underrepresentation and invisibilization of Pasifika people in academia, it's through community. You know, it's not, while I have dear mentors that are not Pasifika, and there's certainly Pasifika or non-Pasifika role models who care about our people and care about their students that, you know, don't share their ethno-racial backgrounds. It just means something else entirely when you see someone that you can really just relate to, and you feel like they were in your shoes at some point, and you're seeing them like doing all these amazing things. And so I think that you know, as folks like us kind of go our own paths, it's so incredibly important. And I don't doubt that either of you, but just using us as an example, it's so incredibly important that we do reinvest and kind of pay it forward, which is a value that is so significant in all of our Pacifico cultures, the value of reciprocity, you know, and tauhiva, you know, nurturing that relational space between people and communities and all of that. And so, yeah, just reinvesting our skills and all of the blessings that we have been granted in our lives. And I also, I really want to, I know I already referenced them, but I really want to shout out the Mana learning community. Community college gets such a bad rap. You know, it's such a stigmatized space of higher education, which is ridiculous because if I didn't go to community college, I would not be here today. That space was just a hub of absolute unconditional love and support, and people who really wanted to see me succeed, and would put in so much more effort and time than their paycheck, you know, reflected, to make sure that could happen for myself and for other students. And so I think spaces like these in academia, that are specifically by and for Pacifica people, um, and yeah, we need to feel like we belong, and that sense of belonging, that true, genuine, authentic sense of belonging that's rooted in a acknowledgement, and not just acknowledgement, but real integration of our culture, that can only come from Pacifica people. And so, yeah, just we need more Mana learning communities everywhere.
Definitely. No, I 100% agree, resonate with everything that you just said. And like, I'm going to work backwards and answer the second question first, but I'm like, one of my mentors who I like kind of like work with in terms of college admissions is Dr. Adrienne Keene. She's a professor at Brown University. She's from the citizen of the Cherokee Nation, but one of her like biggest answers about like what to do when you put Native people in higher education in institutions like this is to extract all the resources you can, get everything you can to do, because these institutions are not made for us in the first place, like I was saying before. So take everything you can and choose to put it. I think it's obviously like what Leila said. It's something instilled in all of us, like from the day we are born, just because of our culture and community. But to take what we can and bring it back home, and that is 100% like my goal and what I want to do. It sucks, I think, that we have to do it in terms of like Western standards and working within the Western system, because Western education, obviously, like that realm, even the realm of academia as we see it and are in right now, is like the Western form of it. And I was lucky enough to grow up in a situation where my mom, my mom and her 5 siblings, all went to college. They all went to University of Hawaii, and then some of them have their master's degrees as well. So I was always put in I grew up in a place where education was like placed at like the forefront of like what I need to do to be considered great and be considered successful and break that stereotype of the lazy like Pacific Islander, lazy Native Hawaiian and everything. Like even one of my aunties is a teacher at Kamehameha School. So I literally grew up having my family like in and education both like in my face at the exact same time. But like the older I'm getting, the more I'm like realizing like how much I want to use like the education I'm getting up here to be able to go back and go to my people, like give it back to my people. That is my ultimate goal, to be able to return home one day. It's made me realize that like academia and education is like so much more than just what like Western standards and ideals would have it to be like be say, like what Leila was talking about, how we were the first like wayfinders and like voyagers and everything. Like I spent my fall quarter studying abroad in Hawaii. Stanford has basically like a field program where you can go back. You can go to Hawaii. I was about to say go back home, but I did. Go back to Hawaii and like participate in a bunch of like different like field research methodologies about like the islands. And I was like, okay, cool, but like we've been doing this already. Like, and something that just like stands out in my brain that I like didn't even like think about until this program, and it's made me like realize something like and see like academia in an entirely new light, in science in an entirely like new way, shape, and form, is one of the things that we had to do was our marine bio unit. We went out to a bunch of different reefs out on the coast of Hawaii Island, and we analyzed fish counts, coral counts, like stuff like that. And then we could choose to do a project on it, like of like whatever we wanted. And like me being like this little scientist I am, I like stuck with like, oh, like analyzing, like running a whole bunch of like regression graphs and everything on how sunscreen use like affects like the coral and the fish, like fish counts and populations as a result of 2010 on and seeing COVID and everything. But the other Native Hawaiian on the program as well, she chose to take it in an entirely new light, and she her project was looking at the different types of fish and the different breeds and fish that you would see as a result of the moon phases and the Hawaiian moon calendar, which basically like dictate the Hawaiian moon calendar, you know, like dictated kind of like which days were good for fishing, which days were good for planting, and like for rest, which ones like you should and shouldn't, what kinds of fish were best to fish on like which days, get on which days and everything. And that like just like completely like blew my mind, because I like realized like this, that is a form of academia. That is a form of research. That's something like what we've been talking about this whole time, that Pacifica people have been doing for like millennia. And it's like just like that blew my mind. For like that project just like sticks with me, because it like totally goes to show that even in like spaces of higher education, whether like even though like we are here to extract from the university, we are still here to give to these universities and give to these, like we are giving up our knowledge to these institutions. So, and we deserve to take everything back that we can from it and give it back to our people and to our communities. So that is like 100%, like, I think like my ultimate goal is to like it sounds horrible, but I feel no shame and regret at all to just take and bring it back. That is exactly what I want to do.
I love that. Do you mind if I jump in real quick? I just want to ask.
Go for it.
I love everything you just said, Camille. This is just maybe a little tangential, but did you say Adrienne Keene?
Yes.
Or dude, wait. Does she have scholarship on Tonga? Because I've Pacific Islands Oceania Studies is like my niche, and done a lot of like research on Tonga, and I remember seeing that name for like some journals and articles on like culture, like artistic practices in Tonga, so like dances and analyzing dances and songs and things like that. And I think it was Adrienne Keene as the author, but I'm not.
Honestly, I'm not 100% sure, but she like basically runs the Native Studies department at Brown University. Shout out to her, queen. Like, but you never know.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. Sorry, I just want to say that.
Oh, no, thank you. That's amazing. I mean, going back to what Camille said, I think that's something that was instilled to me too from a young age. Was like, my dad always said like, nobody will listen to you unless you have the papers, like getting a degree essentially. And so for me, education was always placed at the forefront as well, and taking everything I learned here and taking it back home. I have like the same exact goal, is I want to absorb as much as I can for as long as I can, and take it all back and do something good with it, and share like my knowledge with the people of Hawaii, and you know, get that next generation up and continue that cycle, make it a positive loop instead of a negative one, instead of our people leaving and not being able to come back, to leave, take their knowledge and bring it back. And I also really loved how you talked about how she was Native Hawaiian who did the phases. So my friend actually last year, to defend her psych degree, her topic was on Native people and the like relations of depression and like anxiety to being taken away from their land. So that's what she I went to go watch her presentation.
Wow.
And I'm so proud of her. She's working back on Kauai now and like helping the youth basically. But like when she told me she was gonna do that, I was like, wow, like that's so awesome that we now have the chance to even, talk about those topics. And at first the professor didn't want to let her do it, but she like was able to come up with research and be like, no, like this is a real thing, like because he's from up here and he like doesn't have that significance. And so she was able to connect like being taken from land and like diaspora and all of those things. And I'm really proud of her for that. And that just like made the same connection for me of how we're implementing ourselves into these Western like designs into this college, higher education, and bringing ourselves into it. But yeah, sorry, I wanted to talk about that because that was so amazing. And I guess, sorry.
Go ahead. No, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that was kind of all.
Okay, I just didn't want you to leave from that one point because wow, what important research! Your friend sounds amazing. I would love if I could like read that article.
I'm about to say same because
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that would be great because that is exactly the kind of research that we so desperately need. Because unfortunately, in this current society, as y'all are so well aware of, in the West and in this capitalist American society, like they only listen to numbers, really. And so when it comes and like things that that are in the formats that they consider to be legitimate or like credible, and so like academic papers and statistics and those kind of formats. And so I think what your friend did is so valuable, and really just it's such a great example of what OG, the great Linda Tuhiwai Smith, talks about in decolonizing methodologies, like the importance of having our own people like lead this kind of research. And because like you said, her professor didn't even want to let her do it. Like that's crazy. And so just props to your friend. She sounds amazing. They sound amazing. I just want to say that.
Thank you. I mean, I guess I can kind of go into our next topic of, you kind of already talked about it, but like, what do you guys think about bringing in and mixing in Western practices with Pasifika cultures or even other Native cultures and like kind of that kind of topic?
I think this should be interesting, especially because Leila and I are both Leila's like social sciences and I'm like I guess hard. So I'm intrigued to hear Leila's answer, but it's something that I've been wrestling with, especially like because I know I want to be able to go back home and like my passion like and my love is like for like chemistry, for like geology, and like it sucks that in Hawaii like the only like ways or like one of the few ways I can like be able to like come home and use my degree is in like because we have such a small like job like field and like there's not a lot of opportunities for like specific things as opposed to like on the continent where there's obviously like a lot larger things. But like I've like completely like fallen in love with like working down at Kilauea and at the volcanoes and everything, but it is because of the USGS, because we are under US occupation, it is very much Western science like base. So it's something I've been struggling with, trying to like find that balance. But I 100% believe that they can coexist. Like indigenous research methods and Western research methodologies can coexist. They can corroborate. They do not have to compete. The issue arises when you have Western research methodologies only now like saying that they're having studies to like, you know, like come back and like back up what indigenous and like what Pacifica people have been saying for centuries. Like only now are like we like what we've been talking about, we keep coming back to like the Polynesian like voyaging and everything, but it's so true. Like ever since like the Hokulea like finally made that like like around the world journey, it's only something that's like getting talked about now in the 21st century, that like people are only beginning to acknowledge now, that because Western science has corroborated it, that this is a thing that is possible. But we're like, no, like we have been doing this for centuries. Like our methods of planting, our methods of watching the moon, the stars, the seas, to go about daily life is something that we have been doing for so long. And this just reminded me of like an Instagram post I remember seeing. But like when the missionaries like first arrived in Hawaii, I remember seeing like a Tumblr post saying about how in their journals they would like write how we were like lazy and everything, like, and by noon we would be out surfing and like chilling and everything. But it's not because we were lazy, it's because we were so efficient at what we were doing that by noon we were already done with all of the activities that we needed to do for the day, because we were so just so efficient at doing everything. And it's something that like even on my field program that I did back during fall quarter in Hawaii, it's something that like I continued to learn. Like I guess one example I can think of is when down at up in Kohala, actually in Hawaii, we would be placing rocks around a lot of the uala or the sweet potato that we were growing, and I like never understood like why, other than I thought it was just to like hold the plants in place. But no, it's actually that because our ancestors figured out that when it rains, the rain weathers the rock, and then nutrients from the rock will go into the soil to help the plant grow. So that's something that obviously like Western research methodologies like figured out, like which nutrients and everything were the ones that were being weathered away from the rock, and like the chemical composition of the rock to help the plants grow. But it was Hawaiians, it was Polynesians, it was Pacifica people who figured that out in the first place. Like we survived through trial and error, and we were obviously able to make populations of up to a million people like flourish in these areas, in these remote island landscapes, because of our ways of doing research and methodology. So I 100% believe that like as technology in the modern and 21st century like continues to grow, we need like and flourish, we still need to be able to know and remember that we can use the past and look back on the past to, you know, like I guess pave the way for the present and the future. Like we can use the past as a way to like foreground and show that because we were able to do this before, we can and still will be able to do this in the future. And just using what our kupuna or what our ancestors were able to do as like a framework, we can build up of that and, you know, build onto that and use that to address like larger issues on a larger scale, like what we like and what people are currently facing today, like food insecurity, you know, sustainability in Hawaii, like coming back and being able to show that Hawaiians can do this on a large scale basis. You know, obviously like food imports is such a huge issue right now, like it's being like currently talked about even in like news articles today. Like literally today, that one just came out about like food imports. But like just like the uala, like sweet potato and the rocks just completely reminded me like we need to be able to use like those frameworks of our own like research and our own like indigenous research methodologies to like show like use that as a framework to, you know, pave our journey towards what we can do and solve these like real world issues in the future. Because we like ikabal mamu, ikabal mahobe, you know, like the future is like in the past, like the past is in the future. Like they are interchangeable. We can use everything that we have learned in the past to literally just go from there and show people that we are here today because of what our kupuna and what our ancestors did to keep us here in the first place.
Oh, Camille, I love that answer. Right?
Sorry, I get very heated about certain things.
I love it. I see the passion coming through. And I really love your attention to our Pasifika conceptions of time, and across our Oceania cultures, we have that, like as you said so beautifully, you know, it's like there's one Maori proverb, I don't remember, it's like kimura, something like that, I don't remember, but it's exactly how you said, like moving moving into the future, like looking towards the past and moving to the future. So I love that detail that you pointed out. um, I'll start with the latter portion of this question about kind of like inter-indigenous epistemology, methodology, kind of like collaborations. I definitely am in I really appreciate and want to uplift, and I think there's so much potential there, and already so much work has been done and is being done, that are combining the wisdoms and knowledges of different indigenous cultures, and communities around the world. And I think that potential and that kind of like solidarity and collaboration is part of why the whole like this aggregation and the separation of the AAPI label is so important. And I know this is like a really big issue for a lot of Pacifica folks. It's a huge issue for me. Like it's something that I talk about to every single person who I can, because so many people don't, just in America, they're so unaware that this is a problem for us Pacifica folks. Um, and it's solely an American phenomenon, which is like crazy to me, that it still has such a firm grasp on our society and the way that people think about Pacific Islanders as being kind of like conflated with Asian Americans because of this label. And that's something that I appreciate about being here at Stanford, is that Pacifica people are grouped with the Native community. We are welcomed with open arms at the NAC, the Native American Community Center. We have a home at Muwekma Taruk, the indigenous dorm, and it feels so right. Growing up, when I would be in spaces that are like AAPI, and or I would go to like an AAPI event or something like that, and I'd be like, "Where's the PI?" Like, like I see all the AA, but where's the PI? Like, like how come it's just me? You know? And I think, or like even in posts in flyers, you see it all over online spaces of like an article that references AAPI, but then later they'll say like Asian, and they'll never specify the Pacific Islander. One brief example, in high school, there was a scholarship, and already in at least in high school for me, there was not a single Pacific Islander centered scholarship. There were several AAPI opportunities. And I remember wanting to apply for one of these AAPI scholarship opportunities. And I looked at the fine print, and it listed if you are, Japanese, Chinese, like all these different Asian ethnicities. And it did not say any Pacific Islander ethnicities.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really crazy to me. And just one small example in an ocean of examples of why AAPI is a harmful label for us, and why it is so affirming to be at Stanford and to be grouped with the indigenous folks. Like just the way that and the indigenous folks here, Camille can attest to this. We're in community with folks from all over, folks who are indigenous to Alaska, Alaska Native, to different, throughout North and South America, Central America, and of course from Oceania. And I feel like even though we represent indigenous cultures from all over the world, that in other spaces in America, they might not put us together, we still, like, at least I personally, I feel the real sense of belonging and community there. And it's not oh, we're exactly the same. It's that we can really relate to one another and connect over the shared experiences of stewarding the land, having the land be so fundamental to our ways of life and our ways of living and being and knowing. And like in Tonga, in Tongan language, there's a word fonua. Maybe there's something similar in Olelo, I'm not sure. But it's a word that simultaneously refers to the land and the land's people. And you see really similar concepts throughout indigenous cultures around the world. And so related to one another over that, and the different ways that we steward our respective land and ocean and airscapes. And I think there's um, so much unique wisdom that we each bring to the table, with our respective kind of areas of expertise. And so I think indigenous collaboration is huge, and kind of inter-indigenous organizing has so much potential as well, as we fight for sovereignty, as we fight for the right to again, like, and again, legally, that whole thing is a mess, but to legally, like, claim our lands and oceans and everything, as we always have. And so there's that kind of piece to my answer. And then going back to the first portion with, like, uh Western, like, combining our indigenous practices and epistemologies and such with Western versions of that, I feel like I have kind of mixed feelings about it. Um, I think that I think there's just it's a nuance thing. I'm not like, oh, I think it's like I'm all the way for it or I'm all the way against it. I think it's a really tricky thing, that if done with the right, like, intent, like moving very intentionally, and with our Pasifika values always at the forefront, as the examples that Camille has shared. I think there can be um, some really great outcomes that emerge from those kinds of collaborations. And then, at the same time, when we, like, for example, if we just kind of, like, it's like when you think about Eve Tuck and Kewayne Yang's paper, like, decolonization is not a metaphor, and how the idea of decolonization gets co-opted so much into so many other kind of, like, efforts and statements that aren't really about decolonization, but because decolonization is such, like, a hot word right now that everybody wants to be using, it kind of, the meaning for it gets watered down, and folks are using this, like, indigenous idea and concept in ways, in Western applications that are simply not, what the actual meaning of decolonization is about. And so that's, like, one of the kind of uh, potential risks, I think. But as far, I do think that there are a lot of really great potential benefits of merging, in really intentional ways, again, these two cultures. Um, and I think one of the ways that I'm really passionate about doing so, and that I've seen so many other scholars exemplify really, really well and profoundly, is the collection and preservation of our oral histories and practices, as, you know peoples and cultures um, that have thrived using the oral tradition, storytelling, having our histories not written down, but transmitted through talanoa, through storytelling and song, and things like that. It's a beautiful practice, and I cherish it. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of risk of loss. When this is the only kind of method of record keeping that we have. And so I
Mhm.
think this is where a really great potential for Western, kind of methods and technologies comes into play, that would service us, if done intentionally. And this is something that, for example, like, I forget her Instagram name, but there's someone on Instagram. I think it's Ordinary Tongan Lives. Yes. She is doing amazing work. She's doing a really great journalism work and storytelling work, and her page especially took off during COVID, when we had the Hunga Tsonga Hunga Ha'apai volcano, underwater volcano eruption in Tonga, and we had that horrible tsunami, and just complete communities and villages were just like demolished with the ocean and the aftermath of that. And this woman taking the Western technology of Instagram and of written, like record keeping, history keeping, and photography. Although I'm not sure if photography is a Western invention. I think there's a lot of things that we might classify as Western, but that have folks of color as very integral part of that development. So I don't know about photography. But she took these Western technologies and she's using them to, share in a very genuine, authentic way the incredible stories of these ordinary Tongan citizens, and how their stories of resilience, and innovation, and just like strength and community orientedness in surviving such a horrible catastrophe, and just really great stories on there. And she beautiful photos, and she's having conversations with folks in Tongan, using the Tongan protocols, but again blending all of those indigenous methodologies with the Western to produce something that is bringing awareness to some of the struggles that our people go through and how we overcame those. And that's kind of my long answer, but I think there's a way to do it right.
I just want to say thank you to both of you, and like the topics you guys just talked about could be a whole nother show, and we might as well, like, I'll talk to Carl, and maybe we'll do like a cross show with Momilani and Kamali'i, because we wanted to bring them back as well. And because talking about AAPI, like, that's something we didn't really dive super into, and how PI is often left out, as you said. And then one thing about me is like the word hapa, and how like Asian Americans have started to take the word. I know, we have to do another show now. And like decolonization, and then also taking Western technologies and like using them to share genuine, authentic stories. Like, all of this stuff is things I've been talking about recently. So I think we have to do it. But unfortunately, we are out of time. We can say our final pieces, but I just wanted to say thank you to Pasifika by Design for hosting us and hosting the Stop the Hate campaign, and letting our voices be heard, and letting thousands of people listen to us and hear our stories and where we come from, and put that out in the world. And then also thank you to the California State Library for sponsoring us. Shout out to them, and big thank you to both of you for coming on tonight and joining us. So final pieces, whatever you have to say.
Oh. We talked about a lot. I don't know, Camille, do you have any final words?
We're here, and we're here to stay. We belong there. I guess to summarize it, basically, like, that's everything we've talked about in a couple of words, but it's 100% true. Like, we 100% belong in every single space that we are meant to be in. Period. Kikopo.
Period. But yeah, I think I completely agree with what Camille just shared. And also just expressing my gratitude again to Naki, to Carl, to Pasifika by Design. Oh my god, Kauahoa? I'm so sorry. I'm being because it's horrible. Can you repeat your name for me? Kauahoa, thank you. And to the California State Libraries and everyone watching, these conversations are so important, and the people who really take the time and energy to put these stories out there, y'all are doing God's work. And also, Camille and I represent the Pacific Islander Student Association at Stanford. So check us out on Instagram. Our Instagram is PISA Stanford. Sorry, I know, shameless self-promo.
Plug all the way.
But yeah, plug in PISA Stanford PISA Stanford on Instagram. Also going to shout out College of San Mateo always, and the Mana Learning Community, and the Vakatasi Student Organization. Just giving everyone their flowers that's served. Thank you.
I mean, after your shameless plug, I might as well also. I'm the president of our Pacific Islander Club at Menlo. That's why. So, PIC at Menlo on Instagram, and we're having our luau next week, Saturday. So swing by if you guys are free.
We'll be there.
And yeah, so if we just want to say aloha and ahui ho to everyone, thank you.
Hello, thank you.
Mahalo.